Good afternoon and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. My name is Daniel Landsman. I am FAMM's Vice President of Policy, and I will be the moderator for today's virtual policy briefing on lockdowns. First, I need to address a minor production note. I live in beautiful rural New Jersey, and with that comes some occasional Wi-Fi problems. So I have my colleague and Senior Director of State Policy, Maria Gellner, on the call as well. If for some reason I'm unable to continue the broadcast, Maria will step in my stead, but I apologize in advance if that happens. For more than a year, FAMM has received an increase in outreach from people with loved ones in both federal and state prisons that have locked down. Not only have we seen a rise in the number of lockdowns, but lockdowns are now lasting weeks, months, and extreme cases like the Green Bay Correctional Institute in Wisconsin, more than 1 year. In just the last few weeks, pervasive lockdowns in Connecticut, where 8 gentlemen went on hunger strike in response, and Illinois have received a great deal of media attention. As a result, FAMM launched Life on Lockdown, a campaign focused on the impact of lockdowns on incarcerated people, their families, and prison systems as a whole. Today, we will hear from experts on prison lockdowns as we learn what lockdowns constitute, why they happen, how they impact incarcerated people and family, and what can be done to stem the rising tide of prison lockdowns. I'll now introduce our esteemed panelists, beginning with Alycia Welch, the Associate Director of the Prison and Jail Innovation Lab at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. Alycia's research focuses on the safe and humane treatment of people in custody, with a particular focus on women and individuals living with behavioral health challenges. She has nearly 20 years of experience managing multi-partner projects reforming the justice and behavioral health systems. She directed a transitional housing program for women exiting prison or jail, developed an alternative to incarceration program for young adults, oversaw a multi-state federally funded initiative providing training and technical assistance on behavioral health and criminal justice issues, and designed multiple studies assessing the impact of community-based programs on those who are justice involved. The recipient of several National Policy Research Awards, Alycia served as policy analyst for 2 members of the Texas House of Representatives and has authored numerous reports for state and local government officials, corrections administrators, and advocates that have been selected for inclusion in several publications and featured in major national news outlets. Thank you for being with us, Alycia. Next, we have Reverend Jamesina Greene, founder of A Mother's Cry. Reverend Greene is a pastor, author, and a founder of Mother's Cry, a nonprofit dedicated to amplifying voices of mothers and children impacted by mass incarceration. Her work focuses on addressing systemic injustices, prison reform, and the intergenerational effects of incarceration through advocacy, support groups, and community engagement. Drawing on her own lived experience as the mother of an incarcerated son in Maryland, Reverend Greene leads with compassion, bold truth-telling, and a vision for redemption and reform within the justice system. Thank you, Reverend Greene, for joining us. Next, we have Terry Schuster, the New Jersey Corrections Ombudsperson. Terry Schuster is the Ombudsperson for the New Jersey prison system. His office inspects state prisons and investigates allegations of mistreatment. They operate independently from the State Department of Corrections and have broad and confidential access to facilities, records, and people. Terry and his team have written extensively about lockdowns in New Jersey state facilities, including a report on out-of-cell time in disciplinary housing units and an in-depth inspection of the state's largest discipline unit. His office is on site in every state prison several days each week and is notified anytime understaffing or other emergencies lead to reduced activity or lockdowns in the prisons. Terry is an attorney and previously worked in juvenile corrections oversight in Ohio. In a previous position at the Pew Charitable Trust, Terry supported large-scale sentencing and correction reforms in Utah, Alaska, Louisiana, and Michigan. Thank you, Terry. Last but certainly not least, we have Brian Rowe. Brian Rowe was sentenced to 360 months for a federal drug charge and served over 11 years before being released to home confinement under the CARES Act. Determined not to remain confined until the end of his sentence, he focused on healing and becoming an asset to his community. In 2020, he connected with the Compassion Prison Project, whose work around childhood trauma helped fuel his personal transformation. While incarcerated, he discovered a passion for painting, what he calls the art of finding justice, with one of his pieces even reaching the great LeBron James. He also became a clemency advocate, married, re-enrolled in college to finish his degree in information systems, and grounded his growth in faith, education, and art. I'm glad to say he was granted clemency in 2024 from President Biden. He now works for the Global Digital Needs Agency, a partner of Amazon. Thank you, Brian, and thank you again to our panelists for being here. Alycia, I'm going to start with you. I was wondering if you could help set the stage for today's conversation by giving us a working definition of what constitutes a prison lockdown.
Sure. Well, first of all, hi, Daniel. It's nice to be with you and all of my esteemed panelists to talk about this important issue. A prison lockdown is a highly restrictive operational status where incarcerated people are confined to their cells or housing units for extended periods, typically 22 to 24 hours a day, often with suspension or severe limitation of normal activities such as education, programming, visitation, recreation, work assignments, phone calls, and even showers. Meals are often eaten in cells. Most lockdowns last from a few days to several weeks, but an increasing number of prison agencies keep their facilities locked down for most of the year, sometimes for the entire year. Sometimes only single housing units or wings go into lockdown. Sometimes it's an entire prison. Sometimes a prison agency puts more than one prison on lockdown. And prison agencies use lockdowns to respond to perceived or actual safety threats or emergencies. Lockdowns used to be reserved for major disruptive events that threaten the lives of staff, of prisoners, or their surrounding communities, such as escapes or escape attempts, murders of staff or prisoners, large-scale violent prison riots, or other facility-wide incidents. But we're now seeing them used much more frequently for longer periods of time than ever before, and are no longer reserved for the most disruptive events. When lockdowns are prolonged or used routinely like this, they become a de facto form of solitary confinement. And much like solitary, lockdowns exacerbate trauma symptoms, they undermine rehabilitation, and they increase tension in a facility between incarcerated people and between staff and incarcerated people, at times contributing to more disputes, more violence, increased drug use, and deaths by suicide. So for all of those reasons, from a policy perspective, lockdowns should not be viewed as a neutral operations or management tool for prison agencies. They can and have, in fact, exacerbated unsafe conditions in facilities and contributed to very serious, sometimes irreparable harm.
Thank you so much for that. And there was a lot of really helpful information there. I just want to drill in on two pieces. First, can you talk a little bit more about the rise that you've seen? Your organization, the Prison and Jail Innovation Lab, works with prison and jail systems all across the country. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the rise that you've seen across the country.
Sure. So across the U.S., we're seeing a troubling rise in the frequency, duration, and scope of prison lockdowns. In 2024, an investigative reporter at Truthout revealed that between 2016 and 2023, at least 33 U.S. state prison systems and the Bureau of Prisons, the agency that runs the federal prison system, placed general population adults under non-disciplinary lockdown at least once, but more often repeatedly or for a prolonged period. The reporter conservatively estimated that meant over 260,000 U.S. state and federal prisoners are likely to be under lockdown on any given day. That's a staggering 22% of the total prison population nationwide. And I just want to highlight a few examples so you know what these look like. In 2018, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections placed all 25 of its prisons, that's nearly 47,000 prisoners, on lockdown that lasted 12 days and entailed 24/7 solitary confinement. Women in at least 3 California prisons say they've endured lockdowns 4 to 7 times a week, in which they were locked down 23 hours a day for weeks or months at a time. And the lockdowns happen so frequently that the women really can't even keep track of the reasons for each one. At a federal facility called Big Sandy in Kentucky, regular lockdowns began occurring in 2016. And between 2022 and 2023, lockdowns ran from 60 to 70% of the year. In Wisconsin, as you had mentioned, Daniel, in your opening remarks, there were 2 facilities that had been under some form of lockdown for more than a year. South Dakota Department of Corrections in October of 2023 placed a state penitentiary in Sioux Falls that holds nearly 1,300 people on a 17-day lockdown. And in Illinois, as of December 2023, at least 4 state correctional facilities were under either partial or full lockdown. And a report released by the Department of Corrections in Illinois showed that between 2019 and 2024, the number of lockdowns across facilities nearly tripled increasing from 635 in 2019 to over 1,800 in 2024. Additionally, we're seeing more prison agencies employ lockdown cycles, they call them, where incarcerated people get a very brief return to normal general population status before they're placed on lockdown again. So the size and scope of the increased use of lockdowns should raise a red flag for everyone in this space because it's both a symptom and a signal of deeper systemic issues.
Thank you, Alycia. I noted the rise in lockdowns in the introduction, and I've been following this for a while, but even that was just staggering to take in the breadth and scope of this issue. So last question before we move on to more case studies, if you will, on individual systems. As you explore these different examples that you gave, and there are many, what is sort of coming to bear as the root cause of these lockdowns? You mentioned it shifted from, rare events responding to major security concerns to a more broadly used tool, overused tool. If you could talk a little bit more about what those root causes may be.
Yes, the increase in prison lockdowns is, especially the recent prison lockdowns, is often pinned on the response to COVID-19 when lockdowns were used as legitimate public health measures to prevent the rapid spread of this deadly virus in prisons. However, recent investigative reports have shown that this trend actually started in 2016 in response to nationwide prison strikes over the use of prison labor. So the use of lockdowns increased in 2018 after that, with the statewide lockdown in Pennsylvania as a good example, which I had mentioned earlier, was an attempt to repress the national prison strike occurring at that time. What's more, and beyond that, at the federal level, the BOP implemented lockdowns at its facilities nationwide following the stabbing of Derek Chauvin, the inauguration of President Joe Biden, a double homicide at a facility in Beaumont, Texas, and the murder of George Floyd. And lockdowns were based on the notion that the protest happening in the community that these events spurred could conceivably spread to prisons and the population inside of prisons. As one sort of notable example of just how absurd these lockdowns were over protests, the BOP placed a federal facility in Colorado, the only federal supermax facility in the U.S., on lockdown during the first wave of George Floyd protests, despite the sheer absurdity of locking down the most secure prison in the entire country without any disturbance from prisoners. So even in the most secure facilities, we're seeing these types of lockdowns. And while lockdowns accelerated during the pandemic, they continued even after infection rates declined. Today, lockdowns are used not only in response to drastic events like violence or escapes, but also the presence of contraband and disputes between people, even disputes among just a few that don't really turn violent. Lockdowns are also used to manage other systemic issues like chronic staffing shortages, which has made national headlines as of late. When there aren't enough officers to safely operate recreation yards, transport people to programming, or monitor units, lockdown becomes the default population management tool. But the understaffing itself stems from broader issues, right? Underfunding, low pay, poor working conditions, and declining morale within corrections. Issues over which incarcerated people have no control. So I could list even more examples in entire facilities, and I can circle back to those if there's time. But the point is that lockdowns are no longer used as an option of last resort to respond to major disruptive safety threats at prisons. Instead, they're used with regularity as a tool to manage the population under increasing fiscal constraints. And I would be remiss if I didn't also point out that despite the many extended lockdowns and mounting pressure to fill vacancies and staff and manage growing prison populations, most states neither report nor are legally required to disclose the frequency of lockdowns or what types of incidents occurred during them. This lack of transparency and accountability makes it even easier for population agencies to normalize restricted movement in their facility. And that's really what we're seeing has been the trend with this increase in lockdowns. And despite the purported intention to respond to or address safety or security issues at a prison, they are in fact exacerbating those. So, for example, a statewide lockdown in Missouri, the Missouri Department of Corrections put a number of facilities on lockdown, which resulted in 3 years of in-custody death rates of 11 deaths per month. And that amounted to a total of 135 deaths in 2023. A federal investigation into Georgia's prison system revealed that sexual violence is prevalent in isolation areas in Georgia prisons, and that the Georgia Department of Corrections places some people in lockdown with others who sexually abuse them. And then in response to this issue with protests, some states have seen resistance to prison lockdowns and their related restrictions by using protests. So incarcerated people used hunger strikes in Nevada prisons in 2022, 2023 to protest lockdowns. There were uprisings in New York's Attica Correctional Facility after repeated beatings, food deprivation, minimized visitations, a lot of restricted access to normal daily activities. And in Minnesota, 100 prisoners at Stillwater Prison peacefully refused to return to their cells to protest their lockdown conditions. That was in September 2023. So where they're trying to employ lockdown as a response to protests, they're in fact increasing the likelihood that protests exist because incarcerated people feel like they should be able to stand up for themselves. So ultimately, if we want to reduce reliance on lockdown, we need to invest in the conditions that make prisoners safe for everyone, staff and incarcerated people alike. That means more resources, that means better oversight, that means trauma-informed training, and a clear policy framework that makes lockdowns a last resort and not a routine management tool as we're seeing today.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really helpful landscape setting for what's going on nationwide. I now want to turn to more specific instances. We've got individuals with experience in the federal prison system, the Maryland prison system, and New Jersey prison system from different angles. And I want to start with Brian. Lockdowns really started to come on the FAMM radar from our family members in the federal system who've got loved ones who are incarcerated. We heard of prolonged lockdowns at Leavenworth, at Coleman, Forest City, all over the system. And that's when we really started to pay attention that this was a mounting issue. And so, Brian, I just want to ask you first, what was your experience like with lockdowns while incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Well, yeah, Daniel, thanks for having me. My experience, I came into federal prison, my first day in federal prison, FCI Beaumont was on lockdown. So I came in the federal system with my facility being on lockdown, and it was a horrible experience, horrible situation. I wasn't able to contact my family and told them that I had been transferred from the county to that facility. The inmates in the facility, I've noticed that it caused stress, undue trauma. But yeah, my first day into the federal system, our prison was on lockdown, and I was transferred to FCI Berlin in New Hampshire, where I did experience frequent lockdowns as well. I was also in FCI Fort Dix, where, of course, during COVID, we were on lockdown. So it was terrible.
And Brian, I gave a little bit about your bio, and it hardly did your story justice, but your story is one of tremendous growth while incarcerated. Like I mentioned, college, exploring your talents in art, commitment to your faith. How does lockdowns impact your growth, your time in prison? How did it impact the prison environment? Did you notice a change amongst the people you were incarcerated alongside with, the staff? I would imagine it's hard to really engage in the kind of growth that you were able to experience when you're locked down for 23 hours a day and things like that. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, lockdowns to me, it took away from my time of fighting my sentence. I couldn't go to the law library. I couldn't call my attorney. I couldn't reach out to my family to help with doing my appeals. it also affected my ability to continue my education. We didn't have moves. We couldn't go to classes. There were times where we had issues with going to medical because of lockdowns, and other inmates, they were going through the same thing. I saw a lot of inmates deteriorate mentally because being on lockdown it's really, really, really tough. It's almost like, in a sense, solitary confinement. I remember one time when I was on lockdown, I almost went crazy because it's like the stress and the trauma it takes hold of you. And during some facilities, we would hear guys beating on the doors, kicking on the door. They couldn't take it, and it's not a good feeling. It's not a good place to be. The morale of the institution, it drastically went down, not only with the inmates, but also with the staff. It's really, really tough during those lockdown days.
And, Alycia mentioned that historically lockdowns were done in the interest of safety and security, but, you're describing this buildup of tension and anguish. What is that like when a lockdown's lifted? I mean, what are the next few days after, say, you're locked down for a week? I mean, what is the prison environment like as it returns to normal, quote unquote?
When it returns to normal, it's even more stressful because when you come off a lockdown, they kind of limit your commissary. They limit the time that you're on the phone. So they limit your shower time. So they're coming off of a lockdown, they kind of ease us out. They just don't just let us out. So they'll let us out for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so you have to choose between taking a shower, calling your family, and those things. So it's something that I've never experienced in my life. But it's one thing that I've learned. I've learned that I had to become an advocate. I had to speak up because people we need change. We need change in the federal system as well as in the state system. And somebody that's been through that experience, I have a voice and I have a responsibility to come out and try to bring that type of change.
Thank you. And next, I want to talk about transparency, and this is going to come up as we continue this conversation across Maryland, New Jersey, and as this campaign and people continue to talk about lockdown. But what kind of transparency were you given about lockdown? Were you given reasons for lockdowns? Were they able to estimate how long it may last? I mean, how much clarity did you have on the lockdowns as they were occurring?
We didn't have much clarity. Sometimes, some days, or some institutions, they will tell you how long you probably will be on lockdown. Some institutions didn't care, and that would even bring more stress because nobody knew when they were able to come off lockdown or when that time will come, so that we can contact our family, contact our attorneys, or just have a normal life in prison if that's such a thing. But yeah, there was not much transparency during the lockdowns, and some institutions was better than the others, but that's something that we need to address and to just give us the information that we need so that we can at least have the kind of peace of mind and be prepared.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for sharing with us and giving us insight from your experience. I want to turn next to Reverend Jamesina Greene. Jamesina, you are the mother of someone incarcerated in the Maryland Department of Corrections. How have lockdowns there impacted you, and how often has your son had to experience prison lockdowns?
First, I feel like I just wanted to reach through the screen and give Brian a hug. As a mother, give him a motherly hug. But that I'm almost in tears even thinking about this. The lockdowns have impacted me as a mother because during those times, you cannot get phone calls. You cannot get texts on the tablet. I've sent my son packages that he was not able to receive because you have to go get the package. And because he's locked down, he can't go get it. So, I've been notified by him that, I sent a package. I got an email saying it had arrived, but a week later, he hadn't received it yet because they had been on lockdown. So it impacts me because, and the other family members, is because we don't know what's happening to our loved one. It's like you're already stressed and dealing with a level of anxiety because they're incarcerated. Whether they're innocent or guilty, there's still a level of stress that you as a mother and a family member carry every day. And then when they go through these lockdowns, we don't know where they are. We don't know if they're okay. When we get messages that people have been seen in the emergency room from the facility where my son is located, they're not going to notify you if that was your child that was taken to the emergency room. So that's how I'm impacted. And my son has experienced these lockdowns. I would say for the last couple of years, it's like kind of like how they run the facility where he is. It's like he said to me a few weeks ago. He said, when they come over the intercom and announce that we're on lockdown, what they called it some kind of no movement. They don't use the word lockdown. He says, I've gotten to the point where I'm saying, why don't they just wait until we're off lockdown to make the announcement? Because we're on lockdown so much, it's become the norm.
Thank you. And you touched on this a little bit in your answer, but I want to dive a little deeper. What kind of notification, if any, do you receive as the mother of someone incarcerated in the DOC when your son's prison goes on lockdowns? You mentioned that sometimes you don't find out until someone from the prison is seen in the emergency room. And even then, if it's your son, you're not going to get a notification. But we hear many stories of loved ones showing up for visitation only to learn that the prison is locked down. So what kind of notifications do you get, and how does this impact your ability to keep up with your son, your ability to visit your son, and things of that nature?
We don't get any notification at all. And I have gone to the prison more than once for a scheduled visit and been told that the prison is on lockdown, or the housing unit that he's in is on lockdown, and they're not having any visits. And so, for those of us who don't live near the prison, you've taken the time to drive there. You've gone through the mental preparation of seeing your child because my son has been locked down 20 years now, and I still get anxiety when I leave there, because knowing that I'm leaving him in that environment, it causes me all kinds of health issues. So to go there and think I'm going to at least get to hug him, get to see him in person, and then be told, oh, sorry, the prison is on lockdown, it's very disturbing. Because why don't they notify us some kind of way? Come up with a system, put it on the website or something to let us know that the prison is on lockdown.
I hear you, and now I'm getting the feeling of reaching through the screen for a hug, and I just appreciate you sharing these experiences with us. You have now become a very prolific advocate in Maryland. Very engaged on these issues. You've done a lot to drive awareness in the media, for example, of what is going on in the Maryland Department of Corrections. What drove you to begin your own advocacy to bring awareness to lockdown crisis? And what are some of the changes you are looking for in Maryland to help people like your son live, as Brian said, a normal life in prison, if such a thing exists?
Well, it definitely started with having a son in this situation, because just like the average person, I'm aware that people, I was aware that people are sent to prisons and when they're convicted of crimes. But kind of like from a distance, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I hope they're all right. I hope nothing bad happens to them, because all I do is watch movies about, what happens in prison and think, oh my God, that's terrible. I'm glad, But then once my son became incarcerated in the Maryland Division Department of Correction and started sharing with me some things that were happening. For example, he said to me, Mom, imagine walking down your tier and looking into a cell and see somebody hanging. Imagine walking down your tier and you look down on the ground and you see a river of blood where somebody has killed somebody else. These are the things that we deal with every day. Because you now have a number, they don't see you as a human being. The humanity is completely gone. And so I said, I refuse to be one of these people that just sits back and complain. I need to find out what I can do to make a difference. And so a Mother's Cry originally was a group of mothers that would just get together just to share with one another, to spend time with other mothers, period. But then once my son became incarcerated, I noticed that there were more and more mothers who were dealing with incarcerated children, whether it's youth or adults. And we didn't know what to do. We didn't know, who do I go to if I have a question? When I don't hear from my child for a week, I call the prison. They won't give me any information. I reach out to my senator, my representative, tell them that we're having issues. They don't respond. So I said, okay. So a Mother's Cry is going to have to become a voice for these people whose voices are not being heard. And that's what we've done. We've done some television interviews. We've had 2 meetings so far with the commissioner of the Department of Corrections, and he's committed to seeing us quarterly with our issues and our concerns. We've met with staff members from the governor's office. And recently we submitted a document to Governor Moore himself about our concerns with regard to the lockdowns and extreme heat in the Maryland prisons. And so we're no longer just getting together as a group, just complaining, but we are absolutely making our voice and our concerns heard.
Absolutely. And you all are doing an amazing job. And I see you all over the media. So the message is getting out there loud and clear. So thank you so much, Jamesina. I now want to turn to my fellow New Jerseyan, Terry Schuster. Terry, as Ombudsperson for the New Jersey Department of Corrections, you have a system-wide view of the prison system and its lockdowns. How is the lockdown situation in New Jersey? And what do you see as the biggest issue driving lockdowns in the Garden State?
Hi, everyone. Here in New Jersey, it's staffing. So much of it is staffing. There are other things too, but it's a really hard problem to solve, in part because it used to be that people were lining up in the hundreds and the thousands to go to the police training academy to become correctional officers. They were turning people away. And now, and really during the last 5 years, it's been hard to fill a training academy class. Recruitment is a really, really big thing that has to happen. So on, seasonally, particularly around holidays, in New Jersey, we see a lot of state prisons that get locked down. And what it looks like is, the shift commander comes in for first shift and is like seeing who shows up to work. The shift commander knows I've got a certain number of vacancies, knows I have a certain number of people who are out on medical leave. And then there are X number of people who are assigned to come to work and people call out sick. And so I'm seeing who shows up to work and I'm saying, okay, well, I don't have enough people to run the mailroom today. We're going to close that post. I don't have enough people to answer those phones today. We're going to close that post. I'm going to pull this person to work here and this person to work here. We locked down those guys yesterday. I'm going to open them up, make sure they get showers. And I'm going to lock down these other guys today. I just have to try to play this sort of board game of how do I work with what I have and who's showing up. And so I think the Department of Corrections in New Jersey has been pretty creative and pretty ambitious in their recruitment efforts and their retention efforts for staff. I'm happy to talk some more about what they've done. And I think there's more that can be done here and everywhere. So when it comes to retention of staff, the prison commissioner here fought really hard for pay raises for officers and for their supervisors. And it was not an easy fight. And she won that fight, and then she won it again. So they got actually 2 pay raises over the last few years. They created sort of a staff wellness initiative. They've got all sorts of staff recognitions and created kind of staff, I forget what they're called, but there's sort of a break room, a wellness room for folks to take breaks. And the quality of life for staff is very tied up in the quality of life for the incarcerated population. And so they've done what they can to keep the staff that they have, to prevent them from going and working for some other correctional agency or law enforcement agency, to keep their salaries competitive, and encourage people to stay. For recruitment, they've launched this enormous recruitment campaign to try and get people to apply for jobs as correctional officers. And everywhere you go, every bus that you go on, there's an ad for come work for the Department of Corrections. There's, I think really sophisticated, well put together, videos and recruitment initiatives that are online, that are at schools, that are sort of, around other law enforcement agencies in the state. Come work for the Department of Corrections. Here's what you can do in a corrections job, and making it look appealing, making it feel appealing, and pushing it harder and harder and harder, so that it is a priority. It's the top priority. We're constantly counting what is our retention rate, how many officers each pay period are retiring or taking other jobs, and how many people are we bringing into the academy classes and graduating from the academy classes and placing out in the facilities. So we're now getting to a point in New Jersey where after periods of short staffing and days after days of partial or full lockdowns, there will be sort of a relief, a period of 3 months where, a bunch of officers graduate from the police training academy, and then there's no lockdowns for 3 months until the next major holiday when people call out sick. So I think that those have been really admirable efforts. The experience of being in lockdown is often so desperate, because a lot of the things, as you've heard today, a lot of the things that you would normally do for yourself if you're an incarcerated person, you now have to rely on staff to do for you. So somebody has to come pick up your trash. Somebody has to come bring you toilet paper. Somebody has to let you out for a shower. Somebody has to, if you're having chest pain, somebody has to come get you. You can't just go to the nurse. If all of your meals are brought to you, your laundry is picked up, your trash is picked up. This is actually, it's much more staff intensive to run a housing unit when it's locked down than to run it when it's open. Like when it's open, people can do a lot of things for themselves, and it has the added benefit of people are able to socialize, get some exercise, get some fresh air, have some normalcy in their lives. One of the things that New Jersey hasn't done, but really could, particularly if the governor were to declare an emergency and say, this is a humanitarian crisis. This is, lockdowns are a very extreme human rights problem, would be to sort of rethink and reimagine what can we do with non-uniform staff. So the Department of Corrections in New Jersey has an enormous number of civilian staff, a lot of whom are doing nothing when the facility is locked down. So we have, a whole school building where teachers are sitting in empty classrooms, and because it's locked down that day, and they've got nothing to do but look at their watch, or grade papers or something like that. Those teachers should be in the housing units. We've got programming spaces that are empty and programming staff that are not working with people. Those people need to be on the housing units. We have classification staff who are doing a ton of work in the facilities every single day, and actually could be tasked during emergencies of relooking at how everybody is classified in terms of their custody status. And is there anybody who could reasonably be moved into minimum security custody where they would have a lot more freedom of movement? Could we rethink our classification during periods of extreme understaffing? I think we should. And at the governor level, at the legislature level, are there steps that we can take to reduce the prison population? Are there steps that we can take to really increase transparency, to mandate public reporting about who's locked down, for how long, and what is the plan for getting out of that lockdown? Can we mandate that offices like mine exist in every state, where an outside entity can come in as a neutral observer and lay eyes on everybody who's inside prison and be mandated to tell the public what they see? Because the more transparency, the more the public, I think, would actually be concerned about what's happening on the inside, and how can we solve that problem?
Thank you so much, Terry, and a lot of really interesting and helpful thoughts in there. You set up a whole other panel that we could have that would be another hour, particularly on classification and rethinking how we approach classification. At least at the federal system, it's been the same for such a long time. And in the federal level, you have a 40-year sentence, you're going to be in a high security facility regardless of any other factors, things like that. But one thing you started talking about was this understaffing crisis, and that's another issue that FAMM, I know a lot of other organizations are focusing on. We have the Safer Prisons, Safer Communities campaign with One Voice United, a group that represents the voices of correctional officers, looking to be engaged in criminal justice reform. And one thing that you really touched on was retention. There's the recruitment piece, which New Jersey sounds like they're doing a lot of innovative work on to draw people into the academy, but there's also the issue of retention. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how lockdowns impact that. In your position, you interact with both incarcerated people and correctional staff. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how staff perceive and feel about lockdowns and how lockdowns impact the work that they do.
I mean, my impression is that most officers are talking about, at least, I mean, the ones I'm in contact with are talking about, is this a happy prison or is this an unhappy prison right now? And have their own set of theories, and they have their own training on what makes a happy prison. In general, what that means is staff feel safe, the population is getting the things that they're entitled to, and things are moving and operating normally. I can go through my day, I can go home at the end of the day, and in the meantime, all the people who I'm interacting with are not desperate and angry and shouting and banging on the doors. The moments when, or days or months when a housing unit or a facility really feels like an unhappy place it's sort of a measure of desperation. So staff members who are making rounds to count people or to check in on people will get splashed with urine and feces or unknown liquids because people are so frustrated or have gotten to a place where they feel like there's nothing else that they can lose. There's nothing else that can be taken from them, or where they've actually, they're really suffering some psychiatric consequences of long-term isolation. Staff don't want that. That's not a good sign. That's not something that I want to do when I show up to work, is get splashed with urine. It's humiliating. It's potentially, has health consequences too. And it just shouldn't be happening. And I don't want to be getting involved in unnecessary applications of force and unnecessary extractions of pulling people out of their cells. I would like, more communication as I'm not an officer, I'm sort of putting myself in their shoes, but I think in general, happier facilities are those where the population knows exactly what to expect. They have a good rapport with the staff. The staff is over communicating. Here's what's coming next. Here's what's coming next. I'm going to get to you, but I have to do this other thing first. And the population respects that, and things sort of even out and balance out. Yeah, I think there's this thing about happy, unhappy. And I think officers in general want to be running a housing unit that is safe and good, that where people are getting the things that they need and where people are not constantly banging on the doors and screaming.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a really interesting way to put it. And I imagine it's something that resonates with different state facilities. And so I am going to put you a little bit on the spot of perhaps a little self-promotion, but one thing that you bring to New Jersey, and it's something that FAMM advocates in other states, is your position as an independent oversight body. I wonder, in the context of lockdowns, if you could talk a little bit about the importance of having an independent prison oversight to help establish things like a happy facility to the extent possible for the people who live and work there, and how, having an independent body is going to help bring down some of the external factors that lead to lockdowns and the external factors that come out of lockdowns.
So in New Jersey, the lawmakers passed a law prohibiting solitary confinement, and they thought that they were done with it. They were pretty sure, well, we already passed a law about that. We took care of it. There is no more solitary confinement. And at times when they would invite the Department of Corrections to testify on that topic or testify about their budget, what they heard from the Department of Corrections also was, we don't have solitary confinement. We've changed our policies. Even in disciplinary housing units, the schedule allows for more than 4 hours of out of cell time and programming and recreation and exercise and congregate interaction. And this, my office is independent from the Department of Corrections. We have golden key access. We can come into any facility and lay eyes on things. We can investigate complaints of mistreatment. We can otherwise just inspect facilities for health and safety issues. And what we were finding over and over again was that hundreds of people were in solitary confinement on these housing units where the schedule said they're getting out every day. And so it was a useful set of eyes for lawmakers that believed one thing was happening when another thing was happening, and was able to at least start a conversation about, hey, this appears to be the truth of what it looks like in there. What can we do about it? Is a much, much harder problem. These are not easy problems to solve. If they were, they'd be solved. They'd be solved everywhere. So a lot of the potential solutions that community members will come up with, or a lot of potential solutions that advocates will come up with, people who run prisons have already tried them, and it won't work because of this, or it won't work because of that, or the design of the building means this, and last time we tried that, this problem happened. And so it does take a lot of back and forth of, well, tell me, what are the barriers? Can we break through those barriers? What have you tried? And essentially having sort of enough authority, enough power in an outside oversight body to leverage that to get a real conversation about policy. Say, how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to address this? So we were able to see, in a pretty short period of time, we were able to see fixes like, a whole housing unit that didn't have toilet paper, that didn't have showers for 2 weeks, that didn't have laundry service, that didn't have any sheet exchange for their bedding, that didn't have any trash pickup, didn't have out of cell time, that didn't have social workers visiting, that each of those problems was addressed pretty quickly when we said, hey, I'm going to publish this report and I'm going to share these photographs. It didn't make solitary confinement go away, but it did mean that the people who were confined got toilet paper and got some showers. Figuring out how are we going to get people outside for extended periods of recreation and exercise? How are we going to get people into safe spaces for programming? A lot of that has to do with numbers and with the physical building. And if you've got too many people in a disciplinary housing unit, you can't get them all out for showers every other day. You can't get them all out for outdoor recreation or indoor recreation. And they're hard problems to solve. So I think there's a lot of value of having an oversight body that has real access and some real authority to make transparency in this world that's otherwise pretty closed off from the public, and to for family members, for community advocates, we're either in a position to confirm the thing they already knew but felt powerless to deal with, or to correct the record and say, no, it's actually better. I went back and things got a lot better. Or, hey, you're focused on this problem. The problem is actually this other thing. I think what it allows for is for community members who have a lot of access to sort of like a hotline, for example, in an office like the Ombudsman office, to get real answers and information from an independent source that doesn't have an interest in protecting itself. We're not the Department of Corrections. We're neutral. We're objective. And for the public, for journalists, for lawmakers to get findings about, well, what is it like in there? What do you recommend? What have they tried? What should they get credit for? What do they need in terms of funding? What do they need in terms of new buildings? What do they need in terms of staffing? And really just have another entity at the table for problem solving and for policy making, so that it's not just the Department of Corrections that has an incredibly hard job and that is constantly trying to defend itself as, hey, we work really hard every day. It's not just them having to come up with all of the solutions. It's not just them having to sort of lay out, here's what's going well and not well, but it's another entity also. And it's an entity that is specifically required to make things transparent and specifically required to engage community members.
Thank you so much. And just thank you for the work that you've done. And FAMM is working hard to replicate your office in as many states as we can, and doing a lot of work on that. Before we wrap, I am going to ask of my panelists the impossible, to help put an exclamation mark on this incredible conversation we have. We're starting with Alycia. In 60 seconds, if you could just sum up what you would want your takeaway for the folks watching at home on this pressing issue of lockdowns to be, if you could just share that, that would be great. Starting with Alycia.
Sure. So my big takeaway here is that lockdowns were created to be a response to safety and security issues at the facility. But the conditions of lockdown themselves, in fact, exacerbate the issues that bring up, that create, that bolster the safety and security, the ways in which safety and security has been compromised for both the people that live and work in these facilities. So we need to reframe how we talk about lockdowns and start to understand it as not only a symptom of what the problems are in any given facility, but also that lockdowns in and of itself are contributing to those problems. And then we need to think of better ways to respond to the issues and the problems that are going on. And we can't do that until we understand the full scope of what is happening when lockdowns are brought up. How many people are affected by lockdowns? When are they used? What part of the facility are they used in? We really need a grip on the numbers. And then we need to start to think about lockdowns and ways in which we make change in two ways. One is a more sort of intermediate response, which is how do we make lockdowns less harmful when they exist? But two, we should really employ that harm reduction while doing simultaneously a more long-term reform, looking at ways that we can prevent the issues that contributed to facilities, to prison agencies feeling like they need to put a facility on lockdown to begin with. A lot more I could say there, but I'm going to leave it.
Yeah, sorry, it's cruel to limit to 60 seconds. But Brian, same question for you. In 60 seconds, what do you want the folks to go home with today?
Much like Alicia's, we have to change our perspective on lockdowns. We have to be more proactive than reactive. When I was in Fort Dix, I got permission to organize at least 10 guys, and we got together and talked about trauma, childhood trauma. We use artwork, we use prose, we use articles to kind of express ourselves so that we could let that trauma, that stress out in a different way, but at the same time, show people that we're humans and we deserve better. And so as a community, I think we should continue to have this common bond and come together and unify and help change the perspective. And by doing so, we can change the outcome.
Thank you so much, Brian. Jamesina, I'll turn to you. 60 seconds. What's the big takeaway?
For me, it's that lockdowns are not just operational decisions, but they are emotional, psychological, and sometimes physically harmful decisions. Reducing lockdowns starts with treating people as humans, right? Just because they became property or custody of a state or the federal incarceration, this correctional system, they're still human beings. That's somebody's mother, somebody's father, sister, brother, son, daughter, and they should be treated that way. Across this country, I agree with Brian. We have to shift from reactive punishment to proactive rehabilitation. Supposedly that's the whole purpose of the correctional system in the first place, is rehabilitation. I don't see how lockdowns add to any sort of rehabilitation process. And so I think that our bottom line is that I think that you should listen more to the families and the loved ones that are directly impacted. We don't want to keep hearing about research and data, right? We don't want to keep hearing about what your paperwork says. We want you to hear what we're saying about what's happening to our loved ones. I have been in multiple Zoom meetings with some of the powers that be, I put it that way. And all I get is what's written on paper, what their research is, whatever. And my question is, okay, but how is that coming to show you how the humanity part is being erased? You're telling me what's on a document, and I'm telling you that my son is about to lose his mind because he can't take it anymore. He's never in 20 years said to me until in the last 3 months, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I'm going to close with this. The VP of A Mother's Cry contacted me one day almost in tears because she said her son cellmate was having a stroke. They didn't know what it was, but something was happening. And they bang and bang and bang on the door for 20 minutes before anybody came to find out why they're screaming and yelling. And then the officer that came says, I really don't know what to do. I'm a new hire. So by the time they got this person out and they took him to the hospital, 4 days went by before, my friend's son had heard anything. He didn't know if the man had died or not. But then he found out that the guy had a stroke. So then my question, then his response to his mother was, that made me wonder if this is where I'm going to die. As a mother, as a loved one, as a family member, to hear your child say that, I mean, it's challenging. We go to bed every night wondering if we're going to get a call that says our loved one is dead. And so that's what I'm taking away from this, is that people are acknowledging that there's an issue and that we're going to start doing more about it.
Thank you so much, and for sharing that, and just all the love and strength to your VP, your sons, and the people they're with. And Terry, I'll turn to you with your main takeaway in 60 seconds or less. Thank you.
We got to declare it an emergency. Use that emergency to get creative about how to use civilian staff, get creative about how to rethink classification, get creative about releasing people and shrinking the population. We got to open up the doors to transparency and have people walking around seeing what the conditions are, and we need mandatory reporting about here's the numbers, here's what's happening, here's what we're going to do about it every day.
Thank you so much. And quickly, we're at time, but I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists today. This was such an important conversation, and you all brought so much to the conversation that needs to be ongoing and will be ongoing. I encourage everyone who's watching to follow FAMM social media channels for opportunities to share your story, to sign our petition. Follow A Mother's Cry. Follow Prison and Jail Innovation Lab. Follow the amazing work that Brian is undoubtedly going to continue doing, and follow the work that Terry's doing in New Jersey. And I just want to say thank you all again to my panelists and to the viewers at home. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great day.